Hey guys, tonight we descend slowly into cold northern waters, drifting past the surface world and into a place where time feels heavier and quieter. You imagine the sea stretching endlessly in every direction, dark waves rising and falling in a steady rhythm, the air sharp against your skin. Somewhere above, wind hums across open water, and below you, depth and silence wait patiently. You are not in your bed anymore. You are standing on a narrow wooden ship, far from land, far from warmth, surrounded by nothing but sea and sky. And if you're being honest, you probably wouldn't survive this for very long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the long ship beneath your feet, its wooden planks, damp and slightly uneven, flexing gently with each wave. There is no deck above you, no walls to block the wind, no cabin to retreat into. The Vikings sailed open ships, long and narrow, built for speed and strength rather than comfort. As you stand here, you realize that sleeping on this vessel means sleeping in the open, fully exposed to the North Sea's cold breath. The night air is biting, even through layers of wool and fur. Salt spray drifts across the ship, settling on your cloak, stiffening the fabric as it dries. The smell is unmistakable: wet wood, sea salt, tar, and human bodies packed close together. This is not the dramatic roar of battle you might imagine from Viking stories. This is the quieter, more exhausting reality of travel, where survival depends on endurance rather than glory. Around you, other sailors move slowly and deliberately. Some are adjusting ropes, others shifting shields that hang along the sides of the ship, doubling as protection from waves and wind. These shields are practical, not decorative. They block spray, they add weight for stability, and sometimes they offer a thin barrier between a sleeping body and the freezing night air. You begin to understand that everything on this ship serves multiple purposes, because there is no room for excess. When it comes time to rest, there is no formal bedtime. Sleep happens whenever it can. You lower yourself onto the wooden planks, wedged between bundles of supplies and the long oars that rest in their locks. Your body curls instinctively, trying to conserve warmth. Vikings did not stretch out luxuriously to sleep. They folded themselves into tight shapes, sharing heat, leaning against one another, finding comfort in proximity rather than softness. A mainstream historical fact often surprises people here. Viking longships rarely had any kind of permanent shelter. Archaeological finds and ship reconstructions confirm that these vessels were open, even on long voyages across the North Sea and North Atlantic. Temporary tents or awnings may have been used occasionally while docked or pulled ashore, but at sea, you faced the elements directly. There was no escape from wind or rain, only adaptation. You pull your cloak tighter, thick wool brushing against your face. Wool was essential, prized not for fashion, but for function. Unlike many modern fabrics, wool retains warmth, even when wet. Add layers of animal fur, and you have the best insulation available at the time. Still, it is never truly warm. It is merely survivable. The goal is not comfort. The goal is to last until morning. As the ship glides forward, the rhythm of the waves becomes hypnotic. The hull creaks softly, wood responding to pressure and motion. This sound, steady and repetitive, begins to replace your thoughts. You can imagine how, over time, sailors learned to fall asleep despite the cold, the movement, and the noise. Exhaustion is a powerful sedative. After hours of rowing, steering, and bracing against wind, sleep eventually claims you, whether you welcome it or not. There is a quirky detail historians love to mention here. Vikings often slept sitting up or reclined, propped against cargo or the ship's sides. Fully lying down was not always practical, especially when space was limited. It's not the posture sleep experts recommend today, but it worked well enough when paired with sheer physical fatigue. Your muscles ache, your eyelids grow heavy, and even discomfort fades into the background. Of course, historians still argue whether Viking crews slept in long continuous stretches or in shorter, broken intervals tied to rowing and navigation duties. Some believe sailors rotated rest in shifts, while others suggest that sleep came opportunistically whenever the sea allowed. The truth likely varied depending on weather, crew size, and urgency. What remains certain is that sleep was flexible, imperfect, and deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the ship. As you drift closer to sleep yourself, the surrounding world narrows. The horizon disappears into darkness. Stars flicker faintly above, sometimes hidden behind clouds rolling in from the west. The North Sea is never fully silent, but its sounds soften at night, blending into a low, continuous murmur. You begin to feel small, held between sky and water, carried forward by forces far larger than you. And somewhere beneath all of this, far below the imagined Viking ship and the cold northern waves, lies the deepest silence of all. The Mariana Trench waits, distant and timeless, quietly collecting stories like this one. As your breathing slows and the ship continues on its steady path, you allow the cold, the motion, and the vastness to blur together. You don't fight the tiredness anymore. You let it take you. You begin to notice the ship more carefully now, as if your eyes have adjusted to the darkness. The Viking longship is longer than it is wide, its shape designed to slice through cold water rather than resist it. The prow rises slightly at the front, carved with simple shapes meant to intimidate enemies and spirits alike, while the stern trails low, allowing the sea to follow closely behind. There is no clear separation between working space and resting space. Everything happens here, on the same narrow strip of wood. As you move along the length of the ship, you feel how cramped it truly is. The benches used for rowing double as storage platforms and sleeping areas. Beneath them are barrels of food, coils of rope, spare tools, and personal belongings wrapped in cloth. There is no privacy. Every sound you make is shared. Every movement is felt by someone else. Sleep, here, is a collective experience rather than an individual one. You imagine lowering yourself onto a bench, your back pressed against the side of the hull. The wood is cold, even through layers of clothing. Condensation forms where warm breath meets night air, leaving surfaces damp and slick. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the person beside you. Space is negotiated quietly, through small adjustments rather than words. Over time, bodies learn where they belong. A widely accepted historical fact is that Viking ships were marvels of engineering for their time, built using clinker construction, with overlapping planks riveted together. They were flexible enough to ride waves instead of breaking against them. This flexibility made them fast and resilient, but it also meant the ship was always in motion. Even in calm seas, the longship rises and falls gently, never truly still. You begin to understand that stillness, as you know it, does not exist here. As the ship moves, sounds layer over one another. Water slaps softly against the hull. Oars creak in their locks. As the ship adjusts direction, leather straps squeak. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs, pulling a cloak tighter around their shoulders. These sounds repeat again and again, forming a kind of lullaby, shaped by labor and weather, rather than intention. There is a strange comfort in this repetition. Modern sleep often depends on silence, but Viking sleep depended on familiarity. When the sounds stopped entirely, it might mean danger, changing weather, a hidden shoreline, or an approaching enemy. Noise, in its own way, was reassuring. It meant the ship was alive and moving as it should. You adjust your position, trying to find a balance between warmth and circulation. Sitting too long in one position stiffens the joints. Shifting too often invites cold air inside your layers. Vikings learned these lessons early, guided by discomfort rather than instruction. Sleep became shallow but frequent, a series of short rests rather than one deep, uninterrupted night. A quirky detail, often mentioned in sagas, is how sailors used personal items as pillows, bundled clothing, spare cloaks, even coils of rope. Softness was improvised, comfort was relative. What mattered most was conserving heat and energy. You begin to see how expectations reshape experience. In this setting, even a few minutes of rest feels valuable. Historians still argue whether Viking ships ever carried removable shelters at sea, such as temporary wooden frames covered with cloth. Some evidence suggests such structures were used while anchored or pulled ashore, but their use during open-sea travel remains uncertain. Most reconstructions assume that sailors remained exposed, relying on clothing and shared warmth rather than built protection. As the night deepens, the ship's pace remains steady. No one announces sleep, no one enforces it. You rest when you can, eyes closing briefly, opening again as the ship shifts beneath you. Time stretches and compresses. Minutes feel long, then vanish entirely. The concept of hours loses meaning. Above you, clouds drift slowly, sometimes parting to reveal stars. These points of light serve more than a poetic purpose. They are navigational guides, reminders of direction and position. Even as you rest, others remain alert, glancing upward, adjusting course almost instinctively. Sleep and vigilance coexist here, braided together. Gradually, your breathing slows. The cold no longer feels sharp, only distant. The movement of the ship becomes predictable, almost soothing. You are no longer fighting the conditions. You are adapting to them, the way generations of sailors before you learned to do. And as the longship continues, cutting through dark water, you let your thoughts drift, carried forward by wind, wood, and sea. As the night stretches on, you become more aware of what is missing rather than what is present. There is no deck above your head, no raised structure to block the wind or shield you from rain. The Viking longship offers no cabins, no walls, no true separation between the human body and the open sea. Everything about sleeping here requires acceptance of exposure. You lift your head slightly and feel cold air rush across your face. Even a small movement breaks the fragile pocket of warmth your body has created. The wind carries the smell of salt and distant land, sometimes sharp enough to sting your nose. When rain comes, it does not announce itself dramatically. It begins as a fine mist, barely noticeable, slowly soaking wool and wood alike. Over time, that dampness becomes heavier than the cold itself. A commonly accepted historical fact is that most Viking longships were designed with speed and versatility as priorities, not habitability. These ships needed to travel rivers, cross open seas, and land directly on beaches. Adding permanent structures would have added weight and limited flexibility. The result is a vessel perfectly suited for exploration and raiding, but unforgiving when it comes to rest. You realize that sleeping without shelter changes the way your body behaves. You don't fully relax. Muscles remain slightly tense, ready to respond to sudden movement or shouted commands. Even in rest, there is alertness. Your mind never fully disconnects. Sleep becomes lighter, filled with brief dreams that dissolve quickly when a wave hits the hull or a gust of wind snaps a sail. The sail itself looms above, furled for the night or adjusted for steady travel. When unfurled, it blocks some wind but creates new sounds: fabric flapping, ropes pulling tight, the mast groaning softly under pressure. These sounds blend into the ship's constant rhythm. Over time, you stop noticing individual noises and hear only the whole. A curious detail found in later medieval accounts suggests that experienced sailors could often tell changes in weather while asleep. A shift in wind direction, a change in wave pattern, or an unusual stillness would pull them from rest almost instantly. Whether this was truly common or slightly exaggerated remains unclear, but it speaks to how closely sleep and survival were linked at sea. Historians still argue about how often Viking crews stopped to rest on land versus sleeping continuously at sea. Some voyages likely included frequent coastal stops, where ships were pulled ashore and crews could sleep with temporary shelters or fires nearby. Other journeys, especially crossings of the North Sea, offered no such comfort. In those moments, exposure was unavoidable, and sleep had to happen wherever and however possible. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling its weight press against your shoulders. The fabric is rough but familiar. Many cloaks were fastened with simple brooches, allowing quick adjustment without fully waking. Small design choices mattered here. Anything that reduced effort or conserved warmth was valued, even if it seemed insignificant on land. Rain begins to fall more steadily now, each drop tapping against wood and cloth. The sound is oddly calming, blending with the sea's movement. Water runs along the planks, collecting briefly before slipping back into the ocean. You know that by morning, everything will be damp, heavier, colder. But morning is still far away, and thinking too much about it only makes the night feel longer. Despite the discomfort, there is a strange sense of belonging in this exposure. You are not hidden from the world. You are part of it, moving through it, shaped by wind and water, rather than insulated from them. Sleep, in this context, is less about escape and more about endurance. As your eyes close again, the absence of shelter fades into the background. The cold becomes a dull presence instead of a sharp one. The rain becomes part of the ship's music. You no longer resist these elements. You let them exist around you, knowing that countless sailors before you learned to sleep this way, suspended between sea and sky, trusting the ship to carry them forward through the darkness. As the ship presses forward, the wind becomes your most constant companion. It slides across the surface of the sea and finds every opening in your clothing, every loose fold of fabric, every gap where warmth tries to hide. You notice how the cold feels different here than it does on land. It is sharper, more persistent, carried directly from the water into your bones. The motion of the longship never truly stops. Even when the sea appears calm, there is a subtle rise and fall beneath you, a reminder that you are floating rather than standing. Your body learns to move with this rhythm without conscious effort. Muscles tighten and release in response to each shift, even while you rest. Sleeping while constantly adjusting becomes second nature. A well-established historical fact is that Viking crews relied heavily on routine to manage exhaustion. Rowing shifts were organized so that not everyone worked at once. While some pulled the oars, others rested, repaired gear, or watched the horizon. This system allowed the ship to keep moving while giving bodies brief chances to recover. Sleep, then, was woven into work, rather than separated from it. You imagine yourself lying back slightly as the rowing slows, your shoulders pressed against the side of the hull. The wood vibrates faintly with movement. Nearby, someone takes your place at an oar, the rhythm of splashing water changing subtly as strength and timing differ. These transitions happen quietly, practiced, and efficient. Words are unnecessary. Everyone understands the balance between effort and rest. Wind noise fills the air now, a steady rush that masks smaller sounds. It whips across the deck, tugs at cloaks, and hums against the sail. At first, this noise feels intrusive, but gradually, it becomes another layer of the ship's constant background. Like the waves, it begins to lull rather than disturb. Your thoughts slow, matching its pace. There is a curious observation made by modern researchers studying traditional seafaring communities. Constant motion and repetitive sound can induce a trance-like state. While Vikings had no language for this effect, they experienced it firsthand. After hours of exposure, the body stops resisting. Sleep arrives not as a deep plunge, but as a gentle drifting. Historians still argue about how much actual sleep sailors managed during long voyages. Some suggest that total rest time was far less than what modern people consider healthy. Others propose that frequent short rests compensated for the lack of long sleep cycles. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, shaped by weather, leadership, and the urgency of the journey. You adjust your position again, careful not to disturb those around you. Bodies are packed close, creating shared warmth, but also limiting movement. You become aware of breathing patterns nearby, slow and steady, rising and falling with the ship. These human sounds mix with the wind and water, forming a quiet reminder that you are not alone out here. Fatigue softens the cold's edge. What once felt unbearable now feels distant, almost abstract. Your eyelids grow heavy, closing longer each time they fall. Thoughts become fragmented, drifting between waking and dreaming. Images form and fade without effort. Firelight on shore, voices from another time, the creak of wood repeating endlessly. The ship continues its steady course through the dark sea, guided by experience rather than instruments. As you surrender more fully to exhaustion, the wind's pressure and the ship's movement blend into a single sensation. You are no longer bracing against them. You are floating within them, carried forward through the night, resting in motion rather than stillness. When rest finally comes, you learn that sleeping on a Viking ship is less about choosing a place and more about fitting yourself into whatever space exists. There are no designated sleeping quarters, no assigned spots marked for comfort. Instead, you settle wherever the ship allows, guided by habit and necessity rather than preference. You glance around and notice how the ship's interior is organized without clear boundaries. Shields hang along the sides, forming a partial barrier against waves and wind. Oars rest in their locks, stretching inward, limiting movement. Cargo is stacked carefully to balance weight, and between these elements, human bodies find their places. You lower yourself between an oar and a bundle of supplies, knees drawn in, shoulders slightly hunched. A well-accepted historical fact is that Viking crews slept among their equipment. Archaeological finds and saga descriptions suggest that weapons, tools, and personal belongings were always within reach. This was practical, not symbolic. In the event of sudden danger, there was no time to search for a sword or shield. Sleep happened alongside readiness, not in opposition to it. You rest your head against a rolled cloak or a sack filled with clothing. It is not soft, but it lifts your skull just enough to ease the strain on your neck. Around you, others do the same, improvising pillows from whatever is available. Comfort is created through small adjustments rather than luxury. The cold presses in from all sides. Wood beneath you draws heat away from your body, while wind above you steals what remains. To counter this, sailors slept close together. Shoulders touch, legs overlap, backs lean against one another. Shared warmth becomes essential. Personal space, as you understand it, simply does not exist here. There is a curious detail mentioned in several Norse sagas where sleeping arrangements are described almost casually, as if unremarkable. This tells you something important. For the people living this life, such conditions were normal. The absence of complaint does not mean the experience was easy. It means expectations were shaped by reality rather than desire. Historians still argue about whether crew hierarchy affected sleeping positions. Some suggest that more experienced or higher status sailors may have chosen slightly better spots, perhaps closer to shields or away from constant spray. Others believe that practicality overruled rank, especially during long voyages. Space was limited, and the sea did not care about social standing. You shift carefully, testing how far you can relax without losing balance. Fully stretching out is rarely possible. Knees remain bent, arms tucked in. This curled posture conserves heat and keeps your center of gravity low. Over time, your body adapts to this position, even if it would feel unbearable on land. The ship rocks gently, and you feel it through every point of contact. Instead of resisting, your muscles begin to move with the motion. Tiny adjustments happen without thought. This is how sailors avoid being jolted awake by every wave. The ship teaches you how to sleep on it, slowly and persistently. Nearby, someone exhales deeply, breath forming faint clouds in the cold air. Another shifts, leather creaking softly. These sounds are intimate, unavoidable, and strangely comforting. In this shared space, solitude disappears. You are constantly aware of others, even as you drift towards sleep. There is a mainstream historical observation that long periods of physical labor make the body more tolerant of discomfort. After hours of rowing, hauling, and bracing against wind, the threshold for what disturbs sleep rises significantly. What once felt intolerable now feels merely inconvenient. Exhaustion becomes a shield against awareness. As your eyes close, thoughts slow. You stop cataloging sensations and start letting them blend together. Cold, motion, sound, and proximity merge into a single background presence. You are no longer thinking about where you are lying or what is touching you. You are simply there, breathing, floating between wakefulness and rest. Above you, the sky remains dark and wide. Below you, the sea carries the ship steadily forward, and in this narrow space between, among oars and shields and bundled cloaks, you sleep the way Vikings did, not deeply, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to continue when morning comes, enough to survive another stretch of cold water and open sky. As the hours pass, you become increasingly aware of the materials that stand between your body and the cold. Clothing is no longer just something you wear. It is your shelter, your insulation, your only barrier against the sea's relentless chill. Every layer matters, and every mistake is felt immediately. Wool presses against your skin, coarse but dependable. Viking clothing relied heavily on wool because it behaved differently from plant fibers. Even when damp, it trapped warmth, creating small pockets of air close to the body. Over that, thicker cloaks made from tightly woven fabric or animal skins added another layer of protection. You pull one edge of your cloak over your shoulder, tucking it beneath your arm to block the wind. This movement is slow and practiced, done without fully waking. A widely accepted historical fact is that wool production was central to Viking society. Entire households were organized around spinning, weaving, and maintaining textiles. These garments were not decorative luxuries, they were survival tools, especially at sea. The quality of your clothing could mean the difference between manageable discomfort and dangerous exposure. You notice how sailors position themselves to share warmth, bodies pressed together, backs and shoulders touching. This closeness feels unnatural at first, but it quickly becomes necessary. Heat is exchanged silently, without discussion. No one apologizes for leaning too close. In the cold, politeness gives way to practicality. Furs add another dimension. Draped over legs or wrapped around shoulders, they provide uneven but powerful insulation. You feel the weight of an animal's skin settle across your knees, heavier than cloth, but comforting in its density. The smell is faint but present, earthy and animal, mixing with salt and tar. It is not pleasant in a modern sense, but it is familiar, and familiarity has its own calming effect. There is a quirky detail mentioned by some historians. Viking sailors may have deliberately avoided removing boots while sleeping. Leather footwear, while stiff, helped insulate feet from cold wood and dampness, keeping them on reduced heat loss and made it easier to respond quickly if needed. Comfort was sacrificed for readiness, a theme that repeats itself constantly in life at sea. Historians still argue about how much specialized cold weather gear Viking crews used during long voyages. Some believe that layering techniques and high-quality wool were sufficient, while others suggest that extreme conditions may have forced sailors to accept higher levels of risk. What remains clear is that there was no single solution. Survival depended on a combination of materials, positioning, and shared warmth. You shift slightly, careful to keep the layers in place. Small gaps let cold air rush in, and you instinctively close them again. Over time, these movements become automatic. Your body learns how to protect itself without conscious thought, responding to temperature changes even as you sleep. The ship continues its steady movement, and you feel the warmth of another body against your side. Breathing nearby is slow and rhythmic, sinking gradually with your own. This shared rhythm makes the cold feel less intrusive. Heat spreads slowly, unevenly, but enough to take the edge off the night. There is no illusion of comfort here, only functionality. Yet, within that limitation, a quiet sense of security forms. You are wrapped, surrounded, and carried forward. The sea remains cold and indifferent, but for now, your small circle of warmth holds. As fatigue deepens, your awareness softens. The weight of wool and fur becomes grounding rather than restrictive. The ship's motion rocks you gently, and the closeness of others reassures rather than distracts. You stop adjusting, you stop thinking, you let the layers do their work, while sleep gradually claims you, piece by piece, in the open air of the northern sea. At some point in the night, rest and labor blur together. You no longer think of sleep as a separate activity, something reserved for darkness and silence. On a Viking ship, sleep weaves itself through the ongoing demands of travel, appearing briefly between moments of effort and awareness. You sense the shift before anyone speaks. The rhythm of the oars changes, becoming uneven for a moment as tired arms slow. A few figures rise carefully, stretching stiff limbs, quietly taking the places of those who have been rowing. The exchange is efficient and almost wordless. Everyone understands the pattern. Work rotates, rest rotates. The ship never truly stops. A widely accepted historical fact is that Viking crews operated on informal shift systems during long voyages. While there were no clocks to dictate precise hours, experience guided these transitions. When fatigue became visible, or when conditions allowed, roles changed. This flexible approach kept the ship moving while preventing complete exhaustion. You find yourself pulled gently from sleep as it becomes your turn again. There is no alarm, no sudden command. Instead, awareness seeps back slowly. You sit up, joints protesting quietly, and feel the cold air hit your face once more. The warmth you shared moments ago fades as you separate from those around you. Sleep retreats, but not completely. A haze lingers, softening the edges of thought. Taking an oar, you settle into position. The wood is slick beneath your hands, worn smooth by countless journeys. As you push against the water, the movement feels familiar, almost automatic. Your body remembers what to do, even if your mind feels half asleep. This is not the sharp alertness of daytime labor. It is something slower, steadier. The sea reflects faint light from the sky, waves rising and falling in muted patterns. Each stroke sends vibrations through the hull, through your arms, through your chest. These sensations anchor you in the present. Sleep loosens its grip, but it does not vanish entirely. It simply steps aside, waiting. There is a quirky observation made by some maritime historians. Repetitive physical motion can create a meditative state, even when exhaustion is present. For Viking sailors, rowing in darkness likely induced something similar. The mind drifts while the body works, thoughts thinning until only movement remains. It is not rest in the modern sense, but it is not fully waking life either. Historians still argue about how strictly these rowing and resting shifts were enforced. Some suggest that leadership determined rotation, while others believe crews self-regulated based on necessity. In calmer conditions, rest may have been more evenly distributed. During storms or urgent travel, sleep became a luxury, postponed until safety returned. As you row, the cold begins to feel distant again, pushed aside by movement. Blood flows more freely, warming hands and feet. Breath deepens. Muscles loosen slightly as they find their rhythm. You realize that this brief return to activity makes the next period of rest more welcome, more effective. Exhaustion deepens, but so does relief. When your turn ends, you ease back into the narrow space among oars and cargo. Sleep comes more quickly now. Your body sinks into it without resistance, as if grateful for the chance. There is no frustration about being woken earlier. This pattern is expected. You no longer measure rest in hours, only in moments. The ship continues forward, indifferent to individual needs. It moves according to wind, current, and human effort combined. You become part of that system, contributing when required, withdrawing when possible. Sleep fits itself into the gaps, adapting to whatever space remains. As your eyes close once more, the sound of oars fades into the background. Movement continues around you, but it no longer demands attention. You drift again, suspended between labor and rest, learning the quiet lesson of the sea. Sleep does not need perfection. It only needs opportunity. And on this ship, opportunity arrives in small, fleeting pieces, enough to carry you through the long northern night. Hunger becomes part of the background as the night wears on, a dull presence rather than a sharp demand. Food on a Viking ship is practical, chosen for durability and ease rather than pleasure. Eating is brief and functional, often done without fully waking. Much like sleep itself, you feel for a small bundle near your side, fingers stiff from cold. Inside are simple provisions: dried meat, hard bread, perhaps a bit of cheese. These foods are dense and slow to spoil, meant to sustain rather than satisfy. You chew slowly, conserving energy, aware that every movement burns warmth. Crumbs fall onto the planks, quickly lost among salt and spray. A well-known historical fact is that Viking sailors relied heavily on preserved foods during voyages. Drying, smoking, and salting allowed meat and fish to last for weeks. Grain-based foods provided calories that could be eaten cold. There was no cooking at sea in rough conditions. Fires were dangerous on wooden ships, especially in wind. Meals were simple, repetitive, and quiet. You swallow, tucking the remaining food away. The act of eating brings a brief sense of comfort, not because it tastes good, but because it reassures you. Energy will return, at least a little. Combined with fatigue, this nourishment deepens the pull of sleep. There is a quirky detail mentioned in some accounts of seafaring life. Sailors often ate while half asleep, barely registering the act. Hunger, like cold, was something to be managed efficiently. Pleasure was secondary. Over time, the body learned to accept this rhythm without protest. Historians still argue about how often crews ate during long sea journeys. Some suggest that small, frequent portions were common, while others believe meals were tied to daylight or specific pauses in labor. What seems clear is that eating and sleeping were closely linked, both dictated by opportunity rather than schedule. Exhaustion settles deeper into your muscles now. The effort of rowing, the cold air, and the constant motion combine into a heavy weariness. Your limbs feel thick, slower to respond. When you settle back into your place among the others, your body sinks more readily, no longer resisting discomfort. The sounds around you soften. Conversations, if there were any, have faded. Most of the crew is quiet, conserving breath and warmth. The ship's movement remains steady, a gentle rocking that no longer demands attention. It feels familiar, almost reassuring. You notice how fatigue changes perception. Cold still exists, but it feels muted. The dampness in your clothing is no longer irritating. Even the hard wood beneath you feels less intrusive. Exhaustion smooths the edges of sensation, making everything less sharp, less urgent. There is a simple truth often overlooked when imagining historical life. People adapted because they had to. Viking sailors did not sleep well because conditions were kind. They slept because their bodies learned how. Hunger, cold, and discomfort became signals to rest rather than reasons to stay awake. As your breathing slows, thoughts become less distinct. Images drift through your mind without structure. Firelight flickers briefly, then dissolves. The sound of waves blends into the rhythm of your breath. You no longer track time or distance. You exist only in this moment of rest, floating between wakefulness and sleep. The ship carries on through the darkness, its crew bound together by routine and necessity. Above you, clouds move slowly. Below you, the sea holds its depth and mystery. And here, in the narrow space between effort and surrender, you allow exhaustion to guide you gently back into sleep. The change in the atmosphere comes quietly, without warning. The ship's motion grows less predictable, no longer following the gentle rise and fall you had begun to trust. Waves strike the hull at sharper angles now, sending vibrations through the wood that feel more urgent, more insistent. Even in partial sleep, your body notices. Wind strengthens, pressing harder against sail and cloak. It whistles through rigging and catches loose fabric, snapping it briefly before settling again. The temperature seems to drop all at once, though in truth it has likely been falling for hours. Cold behaves this way at sea, creeping in slowly until it suddenly feels overwhelming. A well-established historical fact is that Viking sailors frequently encountered storms during North Sea voyages. Weather forecasting was based on observation, experience, and intuition rather than instruments. When conditions worsened, crews had little choice but to endure. Turning back was not always possible. Waiting was rarely an option. The ship had to ride it out. You pull yourself more upright, instinctively bracing. Around you, others do the same. Sleep thins, but does not fully disappear. Instead, it hovers, ready to return if the ship steadies again. Shields along the side rattle softly as waves slap against them, spray breaking through gaps and soaking cloaks and hair alike. Rain arrives suddenly, heavier than before. It drums against wood and fabric, blurring the boundary between ship and sea. Water pools briefly near your feet before draining away. Everything becomes slick, heavier, colder. Your hands curl inward, fingers stiffening as you try to preserve warmth. There is a curious detail noted in later maritime accounts. Sailors often learned to sleep through storms, not because the experience became pleasant, but because the alternative was exhaustion. Fear demanded energy. Sleep conserved it. Vikings, like many seafarers after them, learned that resting whenever possible, even during danger, was essential to survival. Historians still argue about how much fear dominated these moments. Some suggest that seasoned sailors treated storms as routine, while others believe anxiety remained constant but unspoken. What is clear is that storms did not stop the need for rest, they reshaped it. Sleep became lighter, more fragmented, but no less necessary. You feel the ship lift sharply, then drop, sending a jolt through your body. Muscles tense automatically, ready to respond if needed. Someone nearby mutters a brief phrase, quickly swallowed by wind. Orders are not shouted unless necessary. Energy is conserved, voices kept low, movements efficient. Despite the chaos around you, exhaustion presses down harder. Your eyelids close again between waves, opening only when motion demands it. The sea roars, but even that sound begins to blur, merging with the constant rush of wind. Your body clings to brief moments of stillness, however imperfect they are. The cold seeps deeper now, but awareness of it fades. Sensation dulls under fatigue. You focus on breathing, slow and deliberate, matching it to the rhythm of the ship as best you can. Each breath feels like an anchor, holding you in place while everything else moves. Gradually, the storm settles into a steady pattern. The sharp jolts soften into heavy swells. Rain continues, but with less force. The ship creaks and flexes, built for this, responding the way it always has. Around you, bodies relax slightly, tension easing just enough to allow rest to return. You sink back into your space, curling inward, pulling layers close. Sleep finds you again, thinner than before, but still present. It wraps itself around exhaustion, quieting fear and softening discomfort. Even here, in wind and rain, above dark water, your body insists on rest. The longship pushes forward through the night, carrying its crew through uncertainty and cold. Storms pass, fatigue remains, and somewhere between alertness and surrender, you sleep, trusting wood, skill, and shared endurance to carry you safely onward. As the storm eases and the ship settles into a steadier rhythm, the darkness feels thicker, almost deliberate. With less wind noise to distract you, other sounds come forward. The slow creak of wood under pressure, the muted splash of waves against the hull, the quiet breathing of those nearby. In this calmer moment, stories begin to surface. You hear them not as formal tales, but as murmured fragments passed between sailors. Someone speaks softly about spirits that live beneath the waves, ancient beings older than the ships themselves. These are not shouted legends meant to impress. They are quiet explanations, ways to give shape to the vast, unseen world surrounding you. A widely accepted historical fact is that Viking belief systems were deeply intertwined with nature. The sea was not just a route or a resource, it was a living presence, unpredictable and powerful. Norse mythology is filled with figures connected to water, storms, and the unknown depths. At sea, these beliefs felt immediate rather than symbolic. You listen without fully opening your eyes. The words drift in and out of your awareness, blending with exhaustion. Someone mentions Jarmungandr, the great serpent said to encircle the world, resting beneath the ocean's surface. Another speaks of drowned lands and hidden realms below the waves. These stories are not meant to frighten you awake. They exist to make the darkness feel inhabited rather than empty. There is a quirky observation found in several saga interpretations. Sailors often repeated familiar myths during long voyages, not for entertainment, but for comfort. Predictable stories created mental anchors. Hearing the same names and ideas again and again made the vastness of the sea feel slightly more manageable. Historians still argue about how literally Viking sailors believed these tales while at sea. Some suggest they were deeply held truths, while others believe they functioned more like shared metaphors. What is certain is that these stories traveled with the crews, shaping how they understood storms, calm waters, and survival itself. As the murmurs fade, silence returns gradually rather than suddenly. The ship does not feel empty, it feels watchful. You sense the presence of the sea around you, deep and unknowable, stretching far below the hull. The thought does not bring fear, it brings perspective. Your worries shrink in comparison. Sleep comes more easily now, softened by narrative and repetition. Your mind drifts through images of dark water and slow-moving shapes, imagined rather than seen. These visions are calm, distant, and oddly reassuring. The sea is vast, yes, but it is also familiar to those who have spent enough time upon it. The ship glides forward, guided by experience and quiet trust. Above, clouds thin slightly, allowing faint starlight to return. Below, the depths remain unchanged, holding their secrets without urgency. You feel suspended between these layers, supported by wood, story, and shared belief. As your breathing deepens, the whispered myths fade into the background. They are no longer separate thoughts. They dissolve into the rhythm of the ship and the steady presence of the sea. Wrapped in fatigue and imagination, you rest again, letting ancient stories drift through your mind as gently as the waves beneath you. The long night continues, but it feels less heavy now. Meaning has been layered onto the darkness, and with it, a quiet sense of acceptance. You sleep, carried not only by the ship, but by the stories that help make sense of the endless water around you. As the night stretches on, your thoughts begin to drift away from sensation and toward memory. Not your own memories, but the traces left behind by those who lived this life long before you. The Viking world, so often imagined through dramatic scenes, survives today in quieter forms. Fragments of wood, worn tools, and stories written down generations later. It is from these remnants that historians try to understand how sailors actually lived and slept at sea. You imagine the longships not as isolated legends, but as archaeological realities. Ship burials discovered in Scandinavia reveal vessels built with extraordinary care, their planks shaped and joined with precision. These ships were not crude or temporary, they were central to Viking identity, symbols of movement, trade, and survival. Yet even in these carefully preserved remains, there is no evidence of built-in sleeping structures. The absence itself speaks volumes. A mainstream historical fact is that most knowledge about Viking daily life comes from a combination of archaeology and written sources known as sagas. These sagas were recorded centuries after the events they describe, often blending history with oral tradition. They mention voyages, storms, and long nights at sea, but rarely pause to describe mundane details like sleep, unless something unusual happens. This silence forces historians to read between the lines. You consider what that silence might mean. Sleep was so ordinary, so expected, that it required no explanation. Just as modern people rarely describe how they sit in chairs, Viking writers may have assumed their audience understood what it meant to rest on a ship. This makes the historian's task difficult, but not impossible. Patterns emerge when small details are gathered together. In some sagas, characters are described as waking suddenly during a voyage, alerted by changes in weather or the approach of land. These moments imply that sleep was happening beforehand, even in harsh conditions. Other passages mention cloaks, furs, or shields used in ways that suggest they doubled as bedding or protection during rest. Each reference is brief, but together they form a picture of adaptable, improvised sleep. There is a quirky detail that often catches scholars' attention. Several sagas describe sailors falling asleep while sitting or leaning, rather than lying down. This aligns with what you have already felt on the ship. Space was limited, movement constant, and full rest rare. Sleep happened where it could, shaped by circumstance rather than intention. Historians still argue about how much trust to place in saga descriptions. Some believe they reflect real practices closely, while others caution that literary conventions may exaggerate or simplify daily life. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Sagas were not instruction manuals, but they were rooted in shared experience. Their casual references to life at sea suggest familiarity rather than invention. Archaeological evidence adds another layer, where patterns on ship timbers indicate where people sat, stood, and braced themselves over long periods. These marks show heavy use of benches and side planks, supporting the idea that these areas served multiple purposes, including rest. Items found aboard ship remains, such as personal belongings stored close at hand, reinforce the notion that sailors slept among their tools and weapons. You reflect on how different this is from modern expectations. Today, sleep is separated from work, given its own space and rituals. On a Viking ship, there was no such division. Rest was integrated into life as it unfolded. The ship was not a workplace that you left at the end of the day. It was your entire world. This realization softens something inside you. The discomfort you imagined earlier now feels less harsh when viewed through this lens. Vikings did not measure their experience against ideals of comfort that did not exist. They measured success by arrival, by survival, by the continuation of the journey. As your breathing slows, the weight of history settles gently around you. The creak of the ship feels older now, layered with the echoes of countless voyages. You are no longer just one body trying to rest in the cold. You are part of a long chain of human adaptation, shaped by necessity and resilience. The sea remains dark and deep, holding secrets that archaeology and stories can only partially reveal. But in the quiet rhythm of the ship, those fragments come together, just enough to guide imagination. You drift again toward sleep, comforted not by certainty, but by connection to lives once lived in motion, under open skies, above endless water. As the voyage continues, questions begin to surface quietly in your mind. Questions that even centuries later remain unanswered. Life at sea left few written records, and much of what is known about Viking sleep comes from inference rather than direct description. This uncertainty settles over you like the night air, not unsettling, but contemplative. You think about how different crews may have experienced sleep in different ways. A small trading vessel moving along familiar coastal routes would have faced gentler conditions than a longship crossing open ocean toward unknown shores. Weather, season, leadership, and crew size all shaped the experience. Sleep was never one fixed practice. It was a flexible response to constantly changing circumstances. A widely accepted historical fact is that Viking voyages ranged from short coastal trips to ambitious crossings of the North Atlantic. These longer journeys demanded endurance beyond anything required near land. Sleep patterns likely shifted with distance. The farther from shore you traveled, the more sleep became fragmented, shared, and opportunistic. You imagine sailors debating these realities in subtle ways, without formal discussion. Experience taught lessons quickly. A poor sleeping position led to stiffness and slower reaction time. Inadequate layering invited illness or injury. Over time, practical knowledge spread through observation rather than instruction. You learned by watching how others rested and copied what worked. There is a quirky detail, often noted by scholars. Some evidence suggests that seasoned sailors could fall asleep almost instantly when given the chance, even in loud or uncomfortable conditions. Modern sleep researchers might describe this as extreme sleep efficiency, born of necessity. Vikings had no choice but to adapt in this way. Opportunity mattered more than ideal conditions. Historians still argue about whether chronic sleep deprivation affected Viking decision-making at sea. Some suggest that accumulated fatigue may have influenced navigation choices or responses to danger. Others point out that human adaptability is remarkable, and that sailors accustomed to such conditions may have functioned effectively despite limited rest. Without written accounts, the debate remains open. You feel this ambiguity settle into the rhythm of the ship. Not knowing every detail does not weaken the story, it deepens it. The gaps invite imagination, allowing you to picture many possible nights, many different ways of resting above cold water. Each crew, each voyage, each night slightly different from the last. As the ship glides forward, the sea seems calmer now, its surface stretching dark and smooth beneath the stars. The crew moves less, voices are rare. Most have settled into whatever rest they can find. You mirror them, drawing inward, letting thoughts slow and soften. The cold remains, but it no longer feels aggressive. It is simply part of the environment, like the smell of salt or the sound of water. You stop labeling sensations as good or bad. They simply exist. This shift in perception makes rest easier. Acceptance replaces resistance. You sense the passage of time without measuring it. Night continues, unbroken by clocks or schedules. Sleep arrives, recedes, and returns in gentle waves. Each moment of rest blends into the next, forming something that feels continuous even if it is not. In this quiet uncertainty, you find a strange peace. Not everything needs a clear answer. Some experiences are meant to be lived rather than explained. Viking sailors slept not because conditions were understood or optimized, but because their bodies insisted on it. As you sink again into partial sleep, the questions fade into the background. The ship carries you onward, steady and patient, moving through dark water beneath open sky. You rest within that movement, held by wood, tradition, and the simple human need to close your eyes and drift, even when the world around you remains vast and unknown. At some point, usually without noticing exactly when, your thoughts drift toward comparison. You imagine what sleep means to you now, in a world built around comfort, insulation, and separation from the elements. Then that image fades, replaced again by the narrow wooden space beneath you and the steady movement of the ship. You realize that Viking sleep was never meant to be restorative in the modern sense. It was functional. It existed to keep the body operating, to allow muscles to recover just enough to continue rowing, steering, and enduring the cold. Expectations were different, and so the experience itself felt different. What you would consider poor sleep, they accepted as normal. A mainstream historical observation supports this idea. Pre-industrial societies often slept in fragmented patterns, shaped by labor, light, and environment rather than strict schedules. Long, uninterrupted nights of rest were rare. Instead, people rested when they could, for as long as they could. On a Viking ship, this pattern was intensified by motion and exposure. You think about how the absence of artificial light changes everything. Darkness is complete out here, broken only by stars and occasional reflections on water. There is no glowing screen, no lamp held nearby. When your eyes close, they close fully. When they open, the world returns in muted tones of black and gray. This simplicity narrows attention, making rest feel more natural even when it is shallow. There is a quirky detail noted by some historians studying maritime life. Sailors often developed a strong sense of internal rhythm, independent of clocks. They felt when it was time to move, to rest, to wake. This sense was shaped by the ship itself, by sound, motion, and the subtle cues of changing wind and water. You begin to feel that rhythm now, guiding you without conscious effort. Historians still argue about how quickly modern people could adapt to such conditions. Some believe that contemporary bodies, accustomed to comfort, would struggle severely. Others suggest that given enough time, humans would readjust, rediscovering capacities long dormant. The debate highlights an uncomfortable truth. Much of what we consider necessary is actually learned. As you lie there, breathing slow and steady, the comparison loses its edge. There is no judgment here, only difference. Viking sailors did not romanticize their sleep, and they did not resent it either. It was simply another part of life at sea, as unremarkable as the creak of wood or the smell of salt. The ship continues forward, unchanged by your thoughts. It does not care whether you find the experience harsh or fascinating. It moves according to forces older than comfort, wind, water, and human effort combined. You are a small part of that equation, resting where you can, adapting as needed. Your body settles more easily now. Muscles loosen despite the cold. Breathing deepens, finding a slow, even pace. The constant motion that once demanded attention now feels familiar, almost soothing. You stop comparing, you stop analyzing. You simply exist within the moment. The sea stretches endlessly around you, dark and calm. The sky above offers no promise of warmth, only distance. Yet within this exposed space, you find a quiet steadiness. Sleep does not arrive dramatically. It slips in gradually, unnoticed, filling the spaces left behind when thought fades. You rest as Vikings rested, not because the conditions invite it, but because the body knows no other choice, and in that acceptance, something softens. The world feels less demanding, less sharp. You drift deeper now, carried by the same slow movement that has guided the ship all night long. Gradually, the longship begins to fade from your immediate awareness, not because it disappears, but because your attention drifts elsewhere. The sounds of wood and water soften, becoming less distinct, as if you are moving away from them rather than the ship moving away from you. Your thoughts sink downward, following an imagined path beneath the hull. You picture the sea growing deeper below, layers of darkness stacked one beneath another. The surface world feels distant now, its cold winds and restless motion replaced by a heavier, slower stillness. In your mind, the Viking ship continues on its journey above, but you are no longer bound to it. You descend gently, carried by curiosity rather than effort. A widely accepted historical fact is that the Vikings had no concept of the deep ocean as we understand it today. Depth was sensed through soundings and intuition, not measured precisely. The sea below their ships was mysterious, unknowable, and largely unexplored. This uncertainty shaped how they imagined the world beneath them, filling it with myth and possibility. As you drift deeper in thought, the water around you grows quieter, movement slows. The sharp contrasts of wind and spray dissolve into a muted, uniform calm. This imagined descent mirrors the way fatigue pulls you inward, away from surface concerns and toward rest. There is a curious parallel here that historians sometimes note. Just as sailors learned to accept the unknown depths beneath their ships, they also accepted the unknown nature of sleep itself. They did not analyze it or control it. They surrendered to it when it arrived, trusting that rest would come and go as needed. Historians still argue about how fear of the unknown shaped maritime cultures. Some believe that constant exposure to uncertainty strengthened resilience. Others suggest it created a quiet, ever-present tension that sailors learned to live with rather than eliminate. Either way, the unknown became familiar through repetition. You feel that familiarity now. The imagined depth below no longer feels threatening. It feels vast, slow, and patient. The deeper you drift, the less effort anything requires. Sensations blur together, becoming soft impressions rather than sharp details. Above you, the Viking ship continues across the North Sea, its crew resting, rowing, watching. Below you, the sea stretches downward into places no human of that time would ever reach. And deeper still lies the Mariana Trench, the farthest descent, a symbol of ultimate quiet and distance. This connection feels natural rather than forced. The trench becomes a resting place for all untold stories, a silent archive where centuries dissolve into stillness. The noise of history fades here. Only presence remains. Your breathing slows further. Each inhale feels deeper, each exhale longer. The imagined pressure of the depths is not heavy. It is comforting, like a weighted blanket made of water and time. Thoughts thin out, drifting away one by one. You no longer picture details. There are no images now, only sensation, a sense of being held, of sinking gently without fear. The journey of the ship, the cold of the sea, the effort of survival, all recede into the distance. Here, in this quiet descent, rest becomes effortless. There is nothing to do, nowhere to go. You simply drift, suspended in darkness that feels safe and endless, letting go of the surface world entirely. You are no longer aware of the ship in any concrete way. Its shape, its motion, its sounds have dissolved into something distant and abstract, like a memory that no longer needs details to exist. What remains is a sense of movement without effort, a gentle continuation that does not demand attention. The cold that once pressed against your skin has softened into neutrality. It is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It simply is. The same is true of the darkness. It no longer feels empty or heavy. It feels wide open and calm, like a space designed for rest rather than fear. A quiet historical truth lingers here. Viking sailors did not sleep expecting comfort or restoration as we imagine it today. They slept because life required it. Sleep was not a destination. It was a pause, a brief easing of effort before continuing forward. And yet, within those pauses, something essential happened. The body repaired itself just enough. The mind released its grip just enough. You feel that release now. There is no vigilance left, no readiness. The need to respond has faded. You are no longer listening for wind changes or watching the horizon. Nothing requires you. Nothing expects anything from you. The imagined depth around you feels steady and unchanging. It does not rush. It does not pull. It simply exists, holding everything gently in place. Time stretches here, losing its edges. Minutes and hours stop meaning anything at all. You rest within that timelessness, carried by the same forces that once carried ships across dark seas. Not urgency, not struggle, just continuation, just presence. And now, as the last remnants of the journey drift away, everything slows further. Words soften, thoughts lengthen, and then dissolve. The rhythm of your breathing becomes the only thing that remains distinct. You are safe here. There is nowhere else to be. The sea above is quiet. The depths below are still, and you are free to rest. As the story fades completely, the silence remains, calm and unbroken, holding you gently as sleep deepens and takes over fully. Wind down now. There is no movement to follow, no images to hold on to. Everything has slowed to its most gentle pace. Your breathing finds its own rhythm, unforced and easy, each breath drifting in and out like a distant tide. Nothing needs your attention anymore. Thoughts can come and go without shape, without meaning. You do not need to follow them. You can let them pass, one by one, dissolving into the quiet. The world feels far away now. Sounds soften, sensations fade. Even time itself seems to loosen, stretching into something smooth and uninterrupted. You are supported completely by the surface beneath you, by the calm around you, by the simple act of resting. There is no effort in sleep now, no transition to manage, just a gentle sinking, deeper and deeper, into comfort and stillness. If any thought remains, it is slow and quiet, like a whisper that does not need an answer, and even that fades soon. Breathing slows, the body relaxes, the mind grows quiet. Nothing else remains to be done. Sweet dreams.